It's me, Suze, the holistic stylist, coming to you today with a rebroadcast of a show that was originally published on May 7th, 2016, called Loving Where You Live. And for those of you that don't know, I've grown up in St. Louis my entire life. I'm 53 years old. I've lived in North County the entire time. And of course, St. Louis is the hub for no other than the Manhattan Project, the dumping of undisclosed amounts of waste from multiple offenders. And of course now, as we all know, with the no dabble and the indigenous groups suffering and speaking out on the obscenities that are happening right now with Mother Earth. Of course, here we are on the Misouri River, which is one of the main life veins for clean water. So a lot of people wonder why I live in this crappy ass town, but I love it. And also, you know, the microcosm does reflect the macrocosm. So even if I move to a well-to-do place in St. Louis of great influence, you see, the rich take in the same poisons as the poor do. So there is nowhere to run and hide, guys, but this is my offering to leave the true history of what's happened here in the Midwest in the United States. So with that, let's share screen and we'll get on with the show. Enjoy.
Taken the heart of me and left just a part of me, and look what you done. Yeah, you took all the best of me, so come get the rest of me. Look.
Wish I could get those ads off. Please don't donate €1 to the Conscious Consumer Network. All my work, time, and energy was given freely and in love. We look for no money here at Sophia's Emporium.
There is someone you ought to be. It's me, Mr. Incomplete. Look at what it become, for it's due to the lack of you that I'm now only happy to look.
1963, the year before I was born. I live about 5 minutes from all of this that you're seeing, right by the airport. I lived in Hazelwood. Fortunately, I didn't play ball in these fields.
feet and left just a part of me. And look, look what you done. Yeah, you took all the best of me, so come get the rest of me. Look back, finish what you've begun. There is someone you ought to meet. It's me, Mr. Incomplete. Look at what I've become, for it's due to the lack of you that I'm now only have to look. Sit back, finish what you've begun. Come and sit by my side. It is nothing but time. Give me time to decide what you need. From where I stand today, I can think of a way. Go away, I might fall. That change of mind and step back. No, not all the time. So come get the best of me. Look back, finish what you've begun.
Hi, and welcome to Sophia's Emporium. My name is Suze, and I've lived here in St. Louis all my life. Now, a lot of people that I see every day are really tired of people speaking about Ferguson or about St. Louis. And I'll give it to the world, really. You know, St. Louis is one of those places that people say it's a little big city, or you can be a big fish in a small pond. But with what we're going to reveal today on this show, I really believe shows the interconnectedness of the false program that we all played a huge role in. And I know it's difficult now that we're learning about all these things, but when we set out to reverse the irreversible and to heal the planet, well, of course, we have to have witness to the history of how we got here. So that first video really spoke to me, and it's by a group called St. Louis Rad Waste Legacy. And these are the good folks that are documenting what's going on at Bridgeton Landfill. And sometimes on the show, I may touch base a little bit on how many different corporations have their heads of business here. I may even talk about how all of St. Louis has been systematically targeted and wiped out, even by the beginning of the 19th century. And so we'll also talk about East St. Louis a little bit today. But think of it this way. At one time, the reason why St. Louis was so important is because it was in the center, whether it was the center of the United States or if it was the center point between two warring factions. And interestingly enough, we speak about water a lot here on Sophia's Emporium. And of course, this was always the trade route because we had three rivers converge. And so whether it was for industry or for community, the water was absolutely necessary. And so today, as we go through this little thing and explore St. Louis, we really have to ask ourselves the question because this is going on in every community. So if you're not interested in St. Louis, pick out a town in your own country where you know things just aren't really right and you're trying to figure out why. But going back to the Manhattan Project, my grandfather, Mitchell, and this would be my maternal grandfather, he was actually the managing editor of a paper called the Custard Combattier. And that was the paper that came back from Italy talking about the war. And I will say this, my grandfather was up pretty high as far as not letting him go. He wasn't important because he was the best gunslinger. He didn't really ever have to kill anyone, so he couldn't be manipulated like that. And he was more a man that spoke from his heart brain. And he was able to get things through sometimes without the censors necessarily being able to stop it, which I also find interesting. We see how many synchronicities there are with, say, the movement even on the internet. And you think, wow, what an awesome coming together of people to share experience and be here for each other as we go through this journey. So I thought what I would do is go into my grandpa's war journals. And this is a letter that he is sending back to the States to his wife, my grandma Hazel. And he is somewhere in the Dolomite Alps in North Italy. And he says, my honey, for the first time since I left the States, I am able to write more or less as I think, so far as censorship is concerned. But most of the choice bits of betrayal, which I've mulled over in my mind these many months, seem to have gotten away from me for the present. Of course, by now you know as much about the point system as I do. In my most optimistic figuring, I can't possibly pull my score above 58, even with 15 combat points and 12 more for Barbara. Of course, you know too that in order to qualify for the privilege of being rejected for discharge on the basis of military necessity, one must have no less than 85. It's clear that this is going to be one hell of a pessimistic Mother's Day greeting. I'm splitting it out in Italy, though it does have very definite advantages over Okinawa, or such godforsaken speck in the Pacific. Then, too, where we at the moment, we do not do much splitting physically. In fact, we are about halfway between Venice and the Italio-Austrian border, and not many miles away from the resort hotel, where Schuschnigg, Blum, Scott, and other named prisoners were taken or rescued depending on how they look at it. One thing is certain along those lines. Many, if not most, of the civilian Italians in these parts are not too sure whether they have been liberated or merely recaptured. I took an Italian language lesson last night from an Italian MD who was a prisoner of the British in Austria 2 years ago. I have an invitation to lunch in his home today. From him, I learned more than Italian vocabulary and grammar. He knows angles that our free press doesn't publish, and which San Francisco will no doubt ignore. Italy, especially north of the Po, may require considerable occupying for years to come. South Italy, like South US, is easygoing, indifferent, and comparatively harmless. Always all yours, Red. So, little did I know, and this is one of the things we'll see today, isn't it something that St. Louis actually had POWs hanging out, partying, living the good life here in St. Louis. So, my goodness, when we look into history, it's absolutely amazing. And like I was sharing with my producer before the show, since history was written and rewritten and whitewashed by such greats like Rockefeller, you know, we were encouraged to learn history of the world. So I am honored to be here with the international community on CCN. And I hope that even though this is a little podunk, one-horse town that I live in, that you can see how the microcosm does reflect the macrocosm. Now, our next video is one called Fragmented by Design. And so, of course, when we think about this, they're pretty much telling you, even though it's a promotional piece, that it's much more effective to separate and divide than it is to unite people, and especially here in St. Louis. It's been like a refugee crisis ever since it began. The immigrants were the first. They were taken advantage of. Oh, let's go back to the very, very beginning with the Indians. Wow. We might have a little of that in here today too. But the way this thing worked was a setup from the go. So we'll talk a little bit more after we run the next bit. Go ahead, baby.
Like the construction of the arch, St. Louis has been two pillars fighting to come together into one united region. The greater area of St. Louis, a confederated system of 91 municipalities, has led to extreme socioeconomic and racial segregation. This ongoing political fragmentation has fostered a more segregated society. The separation of schools and tax districts has had a large effect on the dispersion of funds that each school receives, influencing socioeconomic separation. The discouraged desegregation of the private housing market has also pioneered racial separation at the realty level as well.
First of all, St. Louis metropolitan area has historically been segregated for reasons that came out of the fact that we, on the Missouri side, were a slave state. Even though we stayed with the Union, slavery was practiced here, and then following the Civil War, segregation was fully in place, both residential and public education. One of the consequences of having a large number of municipalities is that if you also have, as a separate phenomenon, segregation by class, with people living in one part of the area middle income in another, and low income in still another, then if you incorporate each, the rich in their own municipalities, the middle income in their own, the low income in their own, then you have disparity of resources, sharp disparity of resources for both local government services as well as things like public education.
It all started when the African American population in St. Louis began to rise. The whites were faced with a dilemma. Do they stay or do they leave? During this time between the 1940s and 1950s, civil rights were a prominent issue and there was tension between whites and blacks. This tension led to a divide which in turn led to white flight. With whites moving out of the city to surrounding suburban areas, the African American population was forced into isolation in the north side of St. Louis. This isolation was accomplished and enforced in a variety of ways, including some private and public strategies of exclusion overlapped and reinforced by one another.
In the 19th century, well into the 20th century, even towards the end of the 20th century, the reason that we were residentially segregated was whites insisting on it and capturing that in law. But now that we're in the 21st century, and
we are now entering the twilight zone, I hear. So I was going to play you a video, and I hear we had audio, but no visual. So the best thing to do is just cut that and go on with the conversation. And interestingly enough, on one of my videos about Ferguson, I did draw my own rendition of a map that you would have seen on there. So we'll just use this as handy reference when we bring these subjects up. Now, we're talking about the decimation of the entire greater St. Louis area. And so, of course, what they did was actually created neighborhoods and blocks where, say, only the poor people could be. And so this started out back in East St. Louis because that was below flood level. We're on the other side of the river from the St. Louis Arch at this point. And there was a mayor that wanted to raise all and he was tragically murdered. I guess the poor people must have had an uprising. They didn't like what's going on. They were factory workers. A lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe. Originally, many of the Polish people worked at factories in East St. Louis. And so after that mayor was murdered, the next mayor was brought in and he carried out the wishes of the one before. And it goes down in the history books that that's what bankrupted East St. Louis. But we're going to back up a second because we're going to come into the middle of the United States where we have abundant resources and materials. And we're also in an area where not too many people are going to harass you. So they decided to put their hub of industry there. All the trains coming in, all the slaughterhouses and the steel industry and different things like that. And it was interesting in that video. They actually spoke about the actual meat they slaughtered really was worth nothing, a zero. But they did make money on the textiles that came from it. So, back to the story. As St. Louis was coming up, and East St. Louis was in its decline, because of course, these factories were run down, and of course, jobs were being moved by this time. And the people would come running across the bridge. And so the immigrants went south, and the slaves that were freed, that worked in East St. Louis, that were told they would have a better life, they went north. And so, being that I've lived within a 10-mile radius, even less than 10 miles, my entire life here in St. Louis, I have watched every story unfold that we're talking about today. So, this idea of refugees and people being moved and not having a connection to their homeland or to their kin. You see, this is one of the major ways that the unrest has been created. And of course, we're all looking for a place to call home. So that's why I say St. Louis is this little itty bitty speck on a map. But as I watch everything, I do see that it's all around the world. It's amazing how we got here. Now, in my little map, I had drawn a few squiggly lines. And so when on the show, I talk about the U City Loop or the St. Louis Arch, you can see that that's just how close we are from the idea of slavery being legal and acceptable versus that it's not. So I will refer many times to Misouri as being a divided state as well. And later we're going to be going into a book written by a beloved native St. Louis and by the name of Charlie Brennan. And he highlights some of these things. But of course, the story beneath it, we have to do a little investigative journalism, I believe. Now, I think a story to tell today, so y'all understand, is my experience in school here in North County. And I grew up in a town called Moline Acres, and it was part of the Riverview Gardens School District. That, along with two other districts, were the first they chose to desegregate. So, before my 5th grade year, believe it or not, I never saw any children in school that had a different skin color as I did. I had never been exposed to it. Any diversity. I mean, and maybe that's why they make fun of cow towns, like St. Louis. But anyhow, that year the children were forced and bussed in. By the end of that school year, our school closed down. And of course, there was never a word said to the children. We were bused then about a mile away to another school in the same district that overnight had become diverse. And so that was my grade school experience, right? Now, where I lived, my dad, the cop, was not going to let me go to the public junior high because he had his opinions, which I didn't agree with. And so I went to a little private school. And of course there was no diversity either. Now that was only 2 short years. And during those years, I saw these little spoiled rich kids do terrible things to their fellow classmates. I had a friend that was very slim, and they used to grab her up at recess and they would throw her in a sewer. And the running joke, of course, when we all came back in from recess was, well, where's so-and-so? And of course, as a new student there, I was being targeted and bullied. So I was her friend, and she'd be in the sewer crying, saying, Suze, help me, help me. And what could I do? What could one 7th grade girl that had just had her heart broken by an 8th grade boy do to save someone in the sewer, right? And so when we grew up, this girl came to work for me. And so later on in the years, I promise you this, I did take care of her out of that duty and friendship. But interestingly enough, you know, when you go to a pasty white Caucasian little private school, and then you're getting ready to go to a high school where there's a diverse mixture of different skin tones. You know, some of the parents said to their kids, hey, you know what, we'll save the money if you don't want to go to Luther North, you don't need to. And so that's when the girl in the sewer and I parted ways. And, you know, public school is like going to the bar for the first time, you know, when you've been sheltered and kept in a little box. So when she got busted partying, of course, the parents didn't want to admit that she was, you know, maybe high or on drugs. They chose instead to believe that she had a mental disorder, and she was medicated, and into the box she went. But I'm getting to my high school experience because I feel this is very important so you can understand the dynamics of St. Louis, Missouri in the early 1980s. My best friend in high school fell in love with the most intelligent, kind, well-bred, sharp-dressed man that was not the same color as she was. And of course, this had to remain a huge secret. And so we kept her secret. We were friends. Now, when the day came that she was caught running with the likes of whomever, she was ripped out of the school. I was never allowed to speak to her again. Of course, I was at fault. See, we always want to blame somebody else. That's why I never have any worries about speaking the truth about my own children, because I would never blame something on someone else just to make myself feel better. I'll take the heat. But anyhow, this girl moved to New Mexico after high school. And there she met a lovely man who she's married to this day. And he was a lighter skin color than the first guy, but darker than her. See how prejudiced and silly this all is? But the family loved him, right? And they moved to Florida, and they had a couple kids. And do you know, because of the peer pressure and the indoctrination into the box, that my dear friend was never allowed and could never allow herself to speak about her true life and her first love to the person that she married. And this becomes important because years later, her daughter gets pregnant by someone who's not the same color as her. Can you imagine this? Here you are, and you're hearing bad words and bad phrases because it's someone who's culturally different than you, and you believe that they are bad and treated someone wrong because of that very thing. Well, that leaves a fractured individual. And so, in my high school experience, being that it was a Christian school and it really was a lovely experience, I am grateful for every moment of my education. But, you know, on the outside appearance, of course, we were all one. We would praise God as one. We would study as one. But there was a little underlying thing hiding in the background. So, for example, back in that day, you know, the girls that stepped out of line were actually told by the school that they better knock that off. And if they catch them again, they'll tell mom and dad and make sure they get some psychiatric help. So, of course, it was all about money because the people that were still sending their kids to that school might change their minds if those lines were crossed. So, I'm in my early 50s now, and that gives you maybe an idea of why, say, here in St. Louis, people believe North County is just the armpit of Missouri, and it's not. It's a beautiful place. But we've had what they call the Great White Flight. So, I love being here. I love a diverse community. The people that are still here, that's what they are all about. So, maybe y'all have heard just a little bit about Ferguson. And here again, people get very tired of it because there really were a lot of false flags around this very subject. And people are still hurt and suffering for the terrible offense with the slaying of Mike Brown on August 8th, 2014. And that was the exact time I was coming home from line. The dogs were going outside. They have to shake. But that was the reason why I originally came online and started a YouTube channel, to give witness to what was going on in Ferguson and to leave a living will for my grandchildren that would document the story. And also just really share my stories. I've been doing that one-on-one behind a chair for the last 30 years. But you know, when you have to tell a story 300 times, it does get a little tiring. And so I enjoy logging them into YouTube. And if someone has a question, I encourage them to watch. And then we can talk heart to heart. And they can have a little basis for what happened. So we're going to look at a video next. Hopefully we have the footage, because here again, it will be a sad day if you cannot see it with your own eyes. But it's called Ferguson False Flag. Obama quietly passes 3,400 new regulations. And keep in mind, friends, he passed these regulations quietly the day before what you will see on this video happened. And I also do want you to realize that when you see the footage, my hair salon was right there. And at the same time, the fire was set to the police car. Up here at the house, which is only about a half a mile away, there were people trying to rip down our banner. It said, "Lord, forgive us, for we know not what we do." They were going to use that to start the fire of the Little Caesars. And of course, my dear friend Janice Sanders, who just opened yesterday. But it's a pretty hard thing to look at. But it's the perfect witness. So you can look at things in your own realm of experience and make sure nobody's distracting you with the one hand while they're poking you with the other. So, let's roll that video and see how that goes, please.
Breaking tonight, we now appear to be days away from President Obama bypassing Congress and allowing some 5 million illegal immigrants to stay in America, despite his own earlier assertions that he has no legal right to do this. The president says he now plans to bypass Congress altogether, allowing, with the stroke of a pen, millions to stay in this country, despite that fact that he himself has argued he does not have the power to do this.
The notion that I can just suspend deportations through executive order, that's just not the case, because there are laws on the books that Congress has passed there are enough laws on the books by Congress that are very clear in terms of how we have to enforce our immigration system. That for me to simply, through executive order, ignore those congressional mandates would not conform with my appropriate role as president.
Of all the money that ever I spent it in good company. And of all the harm that e'er I've done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of which to memory I can't recall. So fill to me the parting mass, for night and joy be with you all. If I had money enough to spend, and leisure time to sit awhile, that is a fair lady in this town, who sorely has my heart begun. Her rosy cheeks and ruby lips alone she has my heart enthralled. Then fill to me the parting glass, good night and God be with you all. All the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away. And of all the sweethearts that e'er I had, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls into my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and softly fall. Good night and God be with you all. So fill to me the parting glass, good night and God be with you all.
You didn't get hit in the head with no rock, girl. Come on.
Then you're seeing the
I remember that.
just across the
I remember
street.
all of it.
I'm okay. I've been hit with much worse in my day. You're seeing the Tidal Max just up the street, right across, and that's another fire. And you're hearing the explosions from inside of some of those places. And then down here, there's another
Thanks,
fire
George
just behind
Soros.
me. We were seeing
You're a
it
hell
just
of a guy,
moments ago.
for
That's
real.
the AutoZone that's on fire. There's a forest fire there.
Sarah, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry. I see other rocks going into the picture there.
there are obviously some really bad people near you. I want you to get to safety if we can, and we'll come back to you and get more of your excellent report. But please.
That was pretty explosive, wasn't it, guys? Can you imagine when our house is like 30 feet away from that building that was in flames? And the firemen that were just kind of hanging out watching, they came over and they knocked on the door and they said, "You need to evacuate." Now, of course, Joe was down the street, like I told you, with a weapon strapped on, protecting the building that the Hair Emporium was in. And as you can also see by the evidence eyes, that video strongly suggests the building that we had the Hair Emporium in was partially destroyed with the fire and the, rocks and the explosions and all these things. So what I did, which was my legal right on my lease, was I abated my rent. And that means that you could deduct 1/3 because the building was partially destroyed. Now in this town, there's a lot of slum wards that are allowed to extort cash. And so since I had been blacklisted, when I first met my dear friend, the Pope, I went to him and I said, "Hey, are you going to be a guy that gets all my money?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And so you see, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy because I wanted my business so badly to be a part of the community that I would pay that high rent. And, as I learned more about my community, my neighbors that have double the space were paying less rent than I was. So you can see why I said, screw that. And that's when I got my eviction letter that would, of course, be illegal, unethical, and immoral. But we already know, guys, the game is conquer and divide. And they wanted a military state here so bad. And we watched that whole thing unfold. And of course, I documented every day in the month of August for that journey. And it's very interesting. But something odd happened before the fires, that terrible night. And that was this guy walked into the hair shop one day. And, people were always walking in just like they always pull up here. They can feel the vibration. They know something's going on, and they're drawn. So this guy comes in the hair shop, and he sees my tribute to my dad, the cop. And he actually, knew my dad's reputation or his name or whatnot. And he was selling his book. And the name of this book is called Crooks Kill and Cops Lie. And so here's this nice retired cop here that wrote the book. And let me read you who he is. His name is Timothy C. Richards. He's a former St. Louis police detective. He held several highly sensitive investigation positions during his tenure. He was in the intelligence unit, which is investigating organized crime groups. He was in the Department of Justice Drug Enforcement Administrative Task Force. And he also did a stint as a homicide detective. He has received numerous commendations and awards from the United States Department of Justice for investigative accomplishments. He has worked extensively with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Secret Service, and the DEA. He is a graduate from the University of Missouri, and he carried the desire to someday write about some of the cases and criminals he dealt with on a daily basis. He retired in 2005, has written 3 full-scale novels, and of course this book is an in-your-face, I was there depiction of organized crooks and cops and their lies. So the reason that I bring this book to your attention today is because, of course, when you tie in what you learn about Manhattan Project and about plutonium and about radioactive waste and fallout and on and on and on. See, people just sometimes want to maybe blame the government, or maybe they even are so delusional that they believe whoever's president actually runs stuff. And of course, here in free and independent media, and when we investigate, we do come to realize that there's many diverse factions that would puppet or possess over a given situation that is going on. And here again, false flags are the thing that make you look over here at the shiny, flashy thing, while over here they're sticking the knife in. So what he does is he ties together the cops and the mafia. And I found that very interesting because, of course, as you read, you go over these things, you see the same names that might be in other books that you're investigating. And you say, wow, isn't it cool to have a library? And you know, these days, some people, I guess because they're stressed, maybe that's why they read the romance novels or play the games. They don't really use the information or grow with it. It's just more of a fluff piece. And I'm telling you what, there is no fluff in this book. And I would highly recommend it if you're a St. Louis buff. And like I said, he was just a very kind man that was meant to come into my life at a certain time to give me a piece of information that would become vital. And here it is. So I call that confirmation of spirit. And you know what? He even signed it for me. So, Crooks Kill, Cops Lie, the true story of the St. Louis Mobster Wars. We got all the action here in St. Louis, you guys. See, it's not as boring as you think. All right, now we're going to jump ship, and I'm going to go to another book. And like I had mentioned earlier, this is a piece of work compiled by Charlie Brennan. And Charlie Brennan is a co-author of Walking Historic Downtown St. Louis, and Here's Where, a Guide to Illustrious St. Louis. He hosts the Charlie Brennan Show on KMOX, CBS Radio in St. Louis, and Donnybrook on PBS KETC. And he lives here in St. Louis with his wife and his 2 children. So, believe it or not, and I always crack up when, you know, here again, we think we discovered America, or, you know, we civilized something when there were honorable, upstanding Native Americans and also other people that would be considered to be European here before, long before they named it St. Louis. So one of the biggest distinctions they say that is overlooked about St. Louis is that it was actually founded by a 14-year-old kid named August Shoto. And, you know, in a way, isn't that funny? Because I guess when you want to blame somebody, a kid's as good as anybody, they can't defend themselves, but the kid was born, August was born September 7th, 1749. And the story goes that a player, and I'm talking about the boyfriend of his mom, the guy's name was Pierre Leclerc. And of course, we have Leclerc's Landing here in St. Louis, which is on the riverfront. So we're going to tie that together. But like I said, Pierre was dating his mom. And in 1763, he picked out a location where St. Louis was going to be, and the importance was a trading post. Earlier on, we spoke about East St. Louis being a place, too, where the industry would come in and be processed. So I guess it's kind of like the story we got here in the United States, where the chickens are killed here, and they send them over to China to be processed. And then they come back to the United States and people eat them. So this to me reminds me of that and made me laugh. But anyhow, Pierre Leclerc traded furs. And he didn't even show up on the scene until April of 1764. Now, the funny thing is even our own historical society isn't sure about what the official date is that St. Louis was founded. And so we have a historian by the name of Charles Van Ravens. And he states that August Shoto showed up with 30 men to clear the site late in the afternoon on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Historian James Neal Prim agrees, and he adds some more information. So he says the 30 men who came with were employees of Maxent Leclerc and Company of New Orleans. And they stepped ashore from this bateau to the west bank of the Mississippi River with a 14-year-old kid as the boss of them, right? There were two other guys who claimed the date was actually one day off. And then they got into this huge argument about this misshapen number. And so there was talk about whether it was the 15th or whatever, but they go into that for a few minutes. And in the end, the birthday that goes down in the history books is February 15th, 1847. So this was an inconvenient way, to say the least, because it fell on a Monday, which wasn't really good, you know, for the social and business dealings. This is like, you know, the whole question of time even being altered, or the calendars, daylight savings time. Even the old stories that they would move a holiday like Easter that's supposed to fall with a solstice to really fit the needs of the people that were doing the worshiping and playing into the ritual. All sorts of connections. Okay, so here's another one for you. out of the book Amazing St. Louis. St. Louis was the first public school system to offer kindergarten. And there was a woman named Susan Lowe, and she studied the works of Friedrich Froebel and Maria Bolte, who was Froebel's protege. And in 1872, the first kindergarten was set up here in St. Louis in the town of Carondelet at a school called the Pear School. Since she had seen the European inspirations concerning the concept of play, which would soften the transition from family to school, they learned shapes, colors, numbers, silence, hygiene, and drawing. Now, this Susan Blow, when she started all this, imagine she was visiting in Europe, and the first thing that came to me was thinking about Steiner's inspirations for the Waldorf School, where kids actually get to honor their childhoods. There is music, art, and nature applied to every one of the core subject groups. And isn't this really nice? Because, of course, this is exactly what Lady Liberty and her son Miro are experiencing. So we see how history brings us something. It gets manipulated. There's division. And then purpose comes back into it. And I do believe that that's what we're seeing here on our planet play out right now. So back to this kindergarten thing, right? By 1878, kindergarten in St. Louis was adopted citywide. And by 1881, they decided that both races, could attend these schools. I have to make the joke that was mighty wide of them, right? But, break that up a little bit. By 1881, like I said, they were benevolent and granted this. And Susan passed in 1916, and by then, 400 cities offered kindergarten. So, I remember my kindergarten, of course, and it really was about play. And we did put our heads down for 15 minutes and take a nap. And we did learn how to socialize and be friends, and also come into a place of respect for the other person. It was awesome. And do you know that by the year 2005, let me tell you about my son's kindergarten experience. So, Ian did not start talking until he was about 4. And that involves the whole story about whether he could hear or not, maybe even if he wanted to hear. And so when he was in kindergarten, one day I got a letter home, and it said that if my son could not spell 6 words that were placed into an order properly, that he would flunk kindergarten. Now, see, this is funny, because in the state of Missouri, kindergarten isn't even required by law that you have to go. Now, of course, these are in the days that people send their kids to preschool when they're 6 months old. But anyhow, here's what I decided to do. With as much of the 6 heart virtues as I had in me, I wrote a letter, and I marched my butt up to that school, and I put the because I always keep the original, on the desk and stated my case and said that I would be removing my son from this institution. Now, when I went and spoke to his teacher, you could see the pain in this woman's eyes because, of course, her work had no purpose. Here she was taking orders, being a robot, working in a public school system, and she really didn't believe what she had to do or say. Surely didn't believe in the system because her kids were in private school. They weren't at public school. So we had a little talk, and I took my son out of school that day. And that's when we were blessed to get Ian into the Waldorf school system. And of course, those philosophies were brought to the forefront of the world's experience by Rudolf Steiner, one of my favorite authors and mentors. It was 4 years that he had that incredible life. Here in St. Louis, Waldorf school is only offered till 8th grade. Different places it would go all the way through high school and college. You should check it out sometime. Okay. Let's get on with this. This next story is great. So, there's one in the book called From Baby Teeth to Nuclear Testing, the St. Louis Baby Tooth Survey. Okay. Now, the first thing I found interesting, because you know what they're doing, they're checking for poisons and nuclear fallout in the baby's teeth. And the year is 1958. And I find it very synchronistic. And then, of course, that bad batch of pus-laden polio vaccine, over 1 million doses, was released and given. So, they knew they were in hot water. They knew that they had lied to the world. They made it out to look like we've saved everybody. But see, they had these 3 different strains of pus. And so if you got the most gentle, I guess the least pussy, that would just give you the flu. This story all goes back here again to wartime, Manhattan Project, nuclear bombs. They were hoping to off Fidel Castro if they could just get the right combination of vaccine together. And then somebody go jab them, because back in the day, you know, that's how a lot of the spies killed people. You see it on TV today. They walk up to you on the street, hit you with a needle, you're done in 48 hours. So this isn't really a new story or a fancy concept. But in 1958, a group of St. Louis researchers, known to be the Committee for Nuclear Information, asked parents to contribute their baby's teeth. And this was so, the moms thought they were on, what do you call it, like reality TV. I mean, their egos were so filled because they felt like they were actually doing something to help science or to help medicine. Little did they know, they didn't come say, hey, we want your kids' teeth because we know that they're full of radioactivity and we want to see how much toxins are in them. You know, they thought they were doing something else. They collected over 325,000 baby teeth. So we have scientists at Washington University and St. Louis University determining through their testing that the teeth contained the radioactive isotope strontium-90, a byproduct of nuclear weapon testing. Remember, St. Louis is the hub of that. Now, of course, strontium-90 did not exist in the teeth of the previous generation. Well, duh, because they hadn't done the testing yet. So, the scientists determined the fallout from nuclear explosions was carried by the wind and rain into the ground, then into the grass eaten by the cows, finally into the bones of the teeth of the children, especially the ones that drank milk. I wonder if that's why everybody was forced to drink the milk back then, that believed they were working the food pyramid, remember? The study found St. Louis children born after 1963 had 50 times as much strontium-90 as the children born in 1950. 1950 was when my grandfather mysteriously dropped dead, that had all the information to all these projects too. And of course, I was born in 1964, so I would be in this club, you see. The good thing is that you actually can do cleanses to help heal these things, and I find it synchronistic again that the lie they tell people is that you can never remove the metals from your body. So, intention is always key, just like with the water. This baby tooth survey, of course, had all sorts of press from the mainstream media. And a guy named Ed Rice, who was one of the study's leaders, he had the fun job of testifying before the Joint Congressional Committee on Atomic Energy the June before I was born. By the next month, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union agreed to a nuclear test ban treaty banning the testing of nuclear weapons in the air, underwater, and outer space. I guess people just forgot. Kind of like the experiments they're doing now, you see. It's the same ones as in Nazi Germany. But the people forgot. This is why people should read and investigate. So, let's bring Kennedy in for a minute. Addressing the nation on July 26, 1963, President John F. Kennedy expressed fear over the effects of nuclear testing on children's health. And I quote, "This treaty can be a step towards freeing the world from the fears and dangers of radioactive fallout. Over the years, the number and the yield of weapons tested have rapidly increased, and so have the radioactive hazards from such testing. Continued unrestricted testing by the nuclear powers will increasingly contaminate the air that all of us must breathe. Even then, the number of children and grandchildren with cancer in their bones, with leukemia in their blood, or with poison in their lungs might seem statistically small to some in comparison with natural health hazards. But this is not a natural health hazard, and it is not a statistical issue. The loss of even one more human life, or the malformation of even one more baby who may be born long after we are gone, should be a concern to all of us. Our children and grandchildren are not merely statistics towards which we can be indifferent." Maybe that's why somebody put a bullet in his head. First, we thought it was the gold, and I know that that has part to do with it. And of course, so does this. And so does secret projects and the misuse and the disrespect that was going on all around him. But see here again, the president is not the boss of the great big thing. This is why we know that the corruption is everywhere. And this is what we're calling out. We're not going to blame individuals anymore, unless we're just bringing some history back and bearing witness. And of course, these people were taken advantage of, just like we are today. And we've been living this forever, all the way back to Atlantis, they say. So, right before I was born, in bloom, and you know, they say that that affects what you resonate and work with for the rest of your days. President Lyndon Johnson recognized the St. Louis Baby 2 survey when he praised the treaty. So now here we got another president saying this. The treaty has halted the steady menacing increasing in radioactive fallout. The deadly products of atomic explosions were poisoning our soil and our food, and the milk our children drank and the air we breathed. Radioactive deposits were being formed in increasing quantity in the teeth and bones of young Americans. Something interesting about all this too, by the way. When they vaccinate people in whatever is in whatever given batch it is, this is what they knew. That an X-ray would be a catalyst that would propel the dis-ease. So, when you think about that, and you think about how many X-rays people get just for no apparent reason at all. See what they're doing now? Okay. This is a great one from my beauty industry. And I don't know if we'll get through all 10, but that's what I was aiming for on today's show. There's a whole book of them you can find. Before there was Estee Lauder, there was arsenic. So I always think of that creepy movie that I never wanted to watch called Arsenic and Old Lace. And the other thing I know about arsenic is that they say it is sweet to the taste. So when you think about the subtle art of poisoning, always remember there are chemicals and naturally occurring substances that are clear, odorless, and highly toxic. So for those of you that don't know, Estee Lauder was the queen of cosmetics. And of course, she was right here in St. Louis. So throughout history, women pursuing beauty have employed oils, creams, lotions, and potions for all sorts of reasons. But there was arsenic before any of the packaged fineries for sale. And the whole idea behind the arsenic was to make your skin like a porcelain goddess. And when you think about it, when a person is being poisoned and is losing their life, they do tend to get pale. And of course, keeping a good woman down, you want them frail and quiet and submissive as well. So I'm sure that worked quite well for them. But this historian, Kenneth H. Wynn, tells us that around the mid-1800s, women ate arsenic to acquire these complexions. Now, we go back to arsenic, say in the Victorian days, and you remember the ladies and the gentlemen of the court, and they would be powdered and their wigs would be powdered. Now we're going back even a few hundred more years. But they got the idea from this report that was done in 1851 by a Dr. T. von Tischuti, which suggested that Austrian peasants ingesting arsenic achieved improved looks and greater physical stamina. Now, keep in mind, the same doctor also reported that it could kill you. It could definitely happen. Now, somehow this aspect of his study wasn't translated or decimated, or both. And in fact, for the fools that do take arsenic out there, when you take it orally, it leads to oxygen deprivation, organ failure, and cardiovascular collapse. Arsenic not only posed grave threats to women, but they warned that husbands could meet untimely ends by kissing their wives and breathing the same air they breathe. The woman that goes down in history as the most beautiful woman in St. Louis was this woman by the name of Katie Bennett. And she died of arsenic poisoning on November 20th in the year 1855. About 10 minutes down the street from here, there is a cemetery called Bell Fountain Neighbors Cemetery. And to this day, you will find her large grave monument there. Her husband hooked her up and got it for her because I guess he missed her sweet face when she was gone. That's number 4 in our top 10 synchronicities of what the hell's going on and the history behind it. Okay. Here's one for you. Now we're going into the beginning of the CIA. And originally it was called Central Intelligence. The first director goes by the name of Rear Admiral Sidney W. Soers. He was a St. Louis insurance executive, and he became the first director of the Central Intelligence. This is kind of a funny story. So here's President Truman, and they're at a White House lunch. They give him a present. So they hand him a black hat, and they hand him a black cloak. They give him a wooden dagger. Well, the club, right? And they were boozing it up that day, they say, because Truman then knighted this guy into the cloak and dagger group of snoopers and director of centralized snooping. And even though this was playful, I mean, seriously, all of a sudden this Soers guy turns around and he's in charge of 2,000 staffers overnight, and he has files on more than 400,000 individuals that they were ready to mess up their lives, like right off the go. Soers had not sought this job. They came for him. And so when he was interviewed and asked about his plans, he explained he wanted to go home He said, I want to go home. I want to go home. And after 100 days, he quit the job. Kind of balls to the wall, right? And a year later, on September 18th, 1947, the Central Intelligence Group actually became the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, it looks like he went underground for a few minutes or took a trip or whatever. But I just want to show you this creepy picture with the cloak and dagger and the seal. And we did some very interesting research when we were looking down the tunnels of time with this one. You will surely find a very interesting discourse. It has only seen 2 views. It was uploaded just a couple days ago. And before that, it was just words. It was just a blog. And all of a sudden it comes to life. And it tells all about the CIA's building. So if that interests you, it's out there. Okay, in 1953, our buddy Soares returns to St. Louis, and he becomes the chairman of General American Life Insurance Company in 1954. He also was the company's president from 1957 through 1958. He was the director or trustee of the Bi-State Development Agency. Now that was our local transit, the buses. He was very involved with St. Luke's Hospital and Lindenwood College. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Next, we have someone from St. Louis that they claim, well, let me just read it to you. The American Revolution hit St. Louis. I never read about that in the history books. I do know that one of my kin, by the name of Dr. George Glasscock, was murdered during the Revolutionary War by an aristocrat named Philip Alston, but I didn't know it actually came here. So, it says quick, think of a Revolutionary War battlefield. Valley Forge, Concord, Lexington, Bunker Hill, St. Louis. In May of 1780, the British soldiers had buddied up with the Indians and camped a few miles outside of downtown St. Louis. And at the time, St. Louis was just a 16-year-old village that was controlled by Spain. But of course, the fur traders, the French fur traders were here first. So you can see all the little groups setting up. Spain was quietly aiding the American Revolution to Great Britain's annoyance. Concerned about the possible attack, the governor built a stone tower 30 feet in diameter and 35 feet wide, 35 feet tall. He called it Fort San Carlos. The fort was largely built with funds and labor donated by St. Louis settlers. The local militia included 85 boatmen, 46 farmers, 38 merchants and traders, 24 hunters, 23 artisans, 1 constable, and 1 musician. I guess somebody had to play the music like when the Titanic was sinking, you know. Think about that. On May 26, 1780, there were about 1,200 redcoats and Indians attacked at this fort. They were met with cannon fire from the tower and muskets from the trenches, it says. Now, the Indians captured a few people that were outside of the fort, and they disemboweled them, which I'm sure made them very unpopular. And they tried to get some people to come outside, you know, like to take the bait, but the other people were staying inside these fort walls. And of course, it goes to say that although far outnumbered, the St. Louis villagers prevailed over the most powerful army on the planet. The St. Louisans' victory at the Battle of Fort St. Carlos prevented the British from gaining a stronghold in the Mississippi Valley. I don't know if you guys know this week or not. If you watch the YouTube channel Dutch Since, there sure is a lot of activity on the plates that are right here in the Mississippi Valley. And you know, if you look at the Navy maps, you'll even see the United States divided off. And we're going to stand and stay here. But, you know, one time Joe said, no, seriously, this might be a seaport and we'll live right on the ocean if they continue with the fracking and blow things up and get the United States to divide off. So, this is very timely as far as what we're going through right now. We have another guy, and of course he does come from the right side of town. And he goes down in history for ending the Cold War. What I find interesting about him is that he was the only person to be both director of the FBI and the CIA. So, William H. Webster served as a judge in St. Louis, both on the federal bench in the Eastern District of Missouri and on the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. Then Judge Webster was offered the job as director of the FBI. He took the job and became just the third permanent chief of the Bureau, following J. Edgar Hoover and Clarence M. Kelly. They're going to go on to say that all of this success came from the idyllic childhood of growing up in suburban Webster Groves. And so now we are south of the dividing line. I'm north of the dividing line. And the dividing line is 10 minutes down the street. And all over, they have created these dividing lines, and they're called municipalities and townships. Because the more divided we are, the more difficult it is to come together. I wish they had some stories about what can come out of North St. Louis, because we're survivors here. And soon, you guys are going to see footage from this town. I've been doing interviews with some of the wonderful people. So you're getting a little bit of doom and gloom history today to show you how we got here. But I promise I'm coming with some fun stuff. And you're going to see the resilience of organic human beings that still have their souls. And those are the people I'm into. I know that I have no clue what time it is. So if my producer could share that with me, I can go forward. Biggie. Bless your heart. Thank you so much. Something that I also wanted to share out of the book today is so close to my heart because it's so close to Joe. And the person that wrote the Serenity Prayer, and you know the Serenity Prayer is, God grant me the strength to accept. Now I can't even. Joe, can you say the Serenity Prayer? Are you in there? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. See, it was in my head. Just took me a minute, and I still am not pulling up that guy's name in my little book. But, you know, Joe was addicted to everything. What happened here, we wonder? With no indoctrination. So, one of the biggest reasons I love Joe is because he's one of the strongest people I've ever met. Here, I found it. The Protestant theologian Reinhold Niebuhr was born in Wright City, just outside of St. Louis, on June 21st, 1892. He attended Eden Seminary in St. Louis, but left around 1913 when his father died suddenly. He is credited with offering the Serenity Prayer as early as 1937. Many feel that he's one of the greatest philosophers of modern day. So, here comes a scary story. And of course, never ever once have I sat through the movie The Exorcist, and I'm sure many of you know that story. In the movie, they portray the child as a girl that is possessed by a demon. But for real, in real life, it was a boy. And this happened back in the year 1949. Why this is interesting to me is because that very home, here again, sits on the other side of Ferguson. And so here I am saying, this is the third cosmic ray, peace, love, and light. But I can show you other videos that will say, there's a demonic portal here in St. Louis, and the arch and many other things illustrate these points. So, as a child, of course, either you're terrified or you find it funny. And then as you get older, you say, well, I'm not involved with that. I'm a good person. I only focus on the good stuff. And of course, the poor people don't realize that it's very easy to be taken over, especially if these people were involved in any kind of mind control projects, any secret ops, any drugs, anything that they would have done to harm these children. And of course, the archdiocese is all over the story too. So I wanted to show you guys just a small video from the house in Belnor, Missouri, where the exorcism actually took place. And before we show this video, just one more tidbit of information. When I was in high school at Luther North, we used to play our softball games at this place called St. Vincent's. And it was this old spooky building. I mean, it was on a beautiful campus. And of course, the nuns and the priests were here and there and everywhere. And you know what they did with this building? They actually turned it into apartments for the poor people. So can you imagine the negative energy going from an insane asylum where they had a possessed kid to where they put people that are on government aid? Real nice. So let's show them this house, Biggie. It looks like your everyday brick house.
Join the crew of Ghost Asylum as they drive out the demons from the actual house that inspired the movie The Exorcist.
There's a gut feeling telling me to get the hell out.
I think The Exorcist house has a stamp in history because, number one, the movie, and it's one of the most documented possessions of all time. And the boy that was exorcised, this was one of his stopping points where he had severe exorcism take place in that second floor room.
I hear people say, if there is something dark at this house, there's something dark at this house. That's not a question mark. Part of my goal is to be able to say, let's try to do something that's going to make things better in the house. And even if they're not getting anything, our going in might stir some stuff up. What do I think these little entities are? They're demons. They're Satan's minions. They're his worker bees, his drones. What's the worst case scenario that will happen? All hell will break loose. It's going to be a night to remember. It's going to be really a night to remember.
Pretty scary, huh? So let me tell you a little about the background of The Exorcist. We have in the movie it taking place on a campus in Georgetown University. The real life exorcism and the Jesuit connection is right here at St. Louis University. This boy was originally in Maryland, and the name that he went by and was identified by was Ron Hunkler. And they say what happened is he got introduced to the Ouija board by his auntie that lived here in St. Louis. Shortly thereafter, the boy's bed shook mysteriously. Bibles flew through the air, and words like Lewis appeared on his torso. So the family decided to travel to St. Louis to come back to the aunt that hooked them up with the Ouija board, right? And this home that you guys just saw was on Roanoke Drive in Belnor. And things did not improve for him at all. He had pain and scratches, the bed kept shaking. And then we have a Father Raymond Bishop, who was a professor, that poured holy water on the bed. And they say it calmed things down temporarily. He brought back another father by the name of William Boder, and he was the pastor of St. Francis Xavier College Church. This is when the bottle of holy water flies across the room, and the furniture rearranges itself. They kept notes in a diary, and it was reported by an alternative media paper here in St. Louis that many of us know. It's called the Riverfront Times. The thing that gets me is that if you didn't believe the audacity of this, they actually went back to that house that you saw, and as a TV thing to get ratings, they went through like a ghost hunt and an exorcism on Halloween. And, you know, you think, wow. I mean, are you conjuring things up just like a CERN portal, or are people supposed to laugh at it? I mean, you know, this story is what people say ridiculous. But it's what we see going on all over the place. There's all sorts of rituals. But there's a question that remains. And they want to know, with all the shouting and the problems in Belnor, why didn't any neighbors notice this? And it says the attending priests remained quiet throughout the years until their deaths. Why didn't they chronicle and share their experience for the betterment of mankind? After all, they were educators. Why hasn't any member of the media tracked down and interviewed Ron Hunkler? Why didn't the priest call in medical professionals? Why wasn't the boy taken to another hospital, such as Barnes Hospital Psychiatric Ward, for a second opinion, or perhaps medication? Why didn't the priest document the marks on the boy's body with a camera? They say perhaps we'll never really know the real story. All I know is I would never choose or be interested in opening up that kind of a thing or bringing it to a viewing audience. So, my own personal recommendation, I wouldn't play with the Ouija board. And always remember, the spiritual world is very real and the veil is thinning. And always know what you're asking for, because these days you're going to get it. So, here's the last one, the top 10 from Amazing St. Louis. And this is really pretty creepy. This is another indoctrination one. So, St. Louis is the birthplace of halitosis, they say. And of course, for those of you that don't know, halitosis is bad breath. And they say if there was a Hall of Fame for products here in St. Louis, Listerine would be in that museum. And I hope you all know that Listerine is not good for your health, and there are things in there that you should avoid. Always look for clean, natural alternatives. But anyhow, Listerine was invented by St. Louis and J.W. Lambert in 1884. Now I'm thinking about Lambert Field. Wow. As a disinfectant for surgical procedures. He had an office and factory on Locust Street, which is downtown, and he ran the Lambert Pharmaceutical Company. In 1922, though, he needed some money. He needed to get sales a boost. And so what he did is he got out there in the medical journal, The Lancet, and, talked about bad breath respectively, and, kind of made faces so people would think, that they needed something. Nobody thought about that back then. These people were bathing once a week. And here somebody worked out an advertising slogan that says, often a bridesmaid, but never a bride, implying that surely if they had Listerine, that somebody would want to marry him, right? And, these ads even warn people that even your best friend will not tell you about the bad breath. Now, within 5 years, Lambert was spending $5 million annually on his advertising. Americans started to become self-conscious about their breath. And the next thing you know, they were netting $4 million a year in profits. Eventually, the word halitosis even appeared in all the dictionaries. Lambert later wrote he feared his tombstone would read that, that's what he was the father of. I mean, you would think he'd be worried about like truth or morality or ethics, but I guess in the end, he didn't want anybody to think he had stinky breath. So, in the end, here we are, these little peons that are blamed for every bit of pollution, every bit of wrongdoing, every bit of stinky caca there is. But as we find out in the end, the person that's usually doing the accusing is the one that's guilty. So thanks to all of our mainstream advertisers and history book writers. Don't be so hard on and corporations. Look, CCN was even involved. And there you were hanging out. And I know today's show, like I said, could have very well been boring for even those who live in St. Louis. But I just really felt the need to leave this in her story and to be a scribe. And one day people will look back and they'll say, we won't ever do this shit again. So I'm going to close out the show. And as always, I want to thank you, the audience. I want to thank my family of broadcasters here at Conscious Consumer Network. And I want to thank Mel and Biggie. Really? You don't, though, but you were trying to work a program. What's up, Sharon? All right. Well, I always like to update you guys and let you know what's going on current time. And it's so interesting because, of course, I don't pre-plan my day's events. I mean, I know that I'm going to rebroadcast these shows through Zoom and speak to you guys a little bit, but as far as which shows I choose, I don't have a set way I'm taking this list. But today on Facebook, it was all about that 1 year ago, see your memories. And this is the building. There you go. Right there is the building that the Hair Emporium used to be in on Church Street. And what it says a year ago is that Mr. Pope is attempting to exit. You know what? We'll just pick this up later. Peace out.